kind of interesting, the dynamic of kids that are in orphanages in the child welfare system. They blame themselves.
Mm.
They don't blame their parents. I'm not good enough.
Wow.
I'm not lovable. I'm not unique. That's why I'm in the child welfare system. It's my
Wow.
fault. When you go in and show them they're uniquely loved, that's when you have real impact.
Welcome to the broadcast. This is Michael Easley inContext, and it's a great treat to have Michael Douris, on the program today. Mike and I have been friends for probably getting close to 40 years now. For over 50 years, Mike's been involved with orphans and adoption and family ministries. He started out in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Dallas County Juvenile Probation Departments, ended up at Buckner Homes, which was a large Baptist effort that he was there for 22 years at Buckner International. And Mike and I have had this kind of parallel journey over the years where I was in local church ministry and Mike was out helping orphans and those in need. And he started Orphan Outreach. What year did y'all start technically?
No, 2007.
2007. And you are now in, these numbers I'm sure are wrong. How many countries are you in?
We're in 10.
10 countries. How many orphanages are you helping?
Oh, we're helping probably over 100 ministries, orphanages, schools, just all sorts. Yeah.
So I always like to talk to people in the orphan ministry about James 1:27, pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is to visit orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself unstained by the world. Lots of interpretations about that passages that have generated orphan ministries and widow ministries. But you and I know a little bit of New Testament Greek. And it's really saying A to Z, right? The most
hmm
the most vulnerable on both ends of the spectrum, the most vulnerable children, the most vulnerable old people. And so
hmm
in that idiom, let's just call it that, you've focused and you've changed somewhat, if it's fair to say, from working with a lot of entities to really honing in on orphanages. Let's start there. Why the change? What have you observed in 50 years of trying to help families and kids?
Yeah, getting back to the Greek and the term orphan, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding because people a lot of times look at the word orphan, they think it's a child has lost both his parents. And UNICEF collects the statistics for this, and so they estimate there's around 140 million orphans in the world. But the way they define orphan is one who has lost the primary source of income for that family. So it's typically lost one parent, and typically the father has been taken out of the picture. And so when you look at those statistics, only about 15 million, which is still a large number, are or double orphans where they've lost both their
Mm,
parents. And the reality is probably around 5,700 kids a day are orphaned because of
wow.
war, neglect, all the different reasons around the world. So the problem doesn't ever go away. It's like Jesus said, the poor are always with you. The orphan will always be with us till Christ comes back. And so
Mm,
the issue is the response of the church. And so when we look at the children that we support, we have a range of support. We support orphanages, but we develop schools in very high risk areas. We have aftercare programs for kids coming out of the child welfare system. There's all sorts of ways to engage that population, but we also do a lot of prevention work where we're actually trying to focus on families to prevent kids from getting into the child welfare system. And so it's really supporting family, which is the core of what you know God set us up to be functioning as a family unit. When that family unit is dismantled, then you have kids ending up in the child welfare system and destitute and all that. It's kind of interesting to me when you look at the Old Testament. There's over 40 references to caring for orphans.
yeah.
And so, it was obviously, the father considered himself the father to the orphan. And you see that in treaty all through the Old Testament. And it ties into the New Testament with one verse, James 1:27. and that is pure and undefiled religions is this ministering to widows and orphans in their distress. So James defines pure religion in the act of caring for an orphan, because an orphan can't give anything back.
Mm,
They don't have anything. So you're giving totally without expecting anything in return, just as Christ did for us on the cross. He died on the cross, not expecting anything to give in return. And we're called orphans in the New Testament. And
yeah.
so there's a parallel that ties all together where God's heart is. And so I feel like, the every church needs to have a distinctive ministry to serve this population and really focus on it, because I feel like it's God's heart. It's part of the mission of the church.
One of the things you and I talked about many, many times is the shift between international adoption and
Mhm.
orphan care. And you and I are both, pretty involved on both sides of those
Mhm.
equations. And when you started Orphan Outreach, you said we're going to focus more on the orphan than these international adoptions. Expand on that a little bit.
Mhm.
I think there's still sort of a, I don't want to be unkind, but there's still sort of an altruistic, we need to adopt these children and bring them to the States and give them a wonderful opportunity. But we found that's not always the best case, right?
Yeah, when you look at the statistics for adoption, when you see the outcomes for kids and child welfare systems in different countries, typically adoption only accounts for about 5 to 10% of the kids' permanency planning. And even at the height of international adoption, and right now, the last 10, 15 years, international adoption has dropped tremendously, from a height of around 20,000 kids a year that were being adopted in the United States to now I think it's less than 3,000 kids that are being adopted into the country. And there were a lot of reasons for that. One is a lot of corruption in the adoption
Mm-hmm.
work. There was players from all over the world that were part of that, and it became in many ways, a way to make money. And so there was a lot of corruption. So countries would start, and then the corruption would happen, and they would shut everything down. But now there's a real push for these countries to develop an adoption culture within the country, and there's a lot of work being done on that. And so the international adoption that happens now is mostly special needs kids
Hmm.
that they can't find families for in those countries. And so a lot of kids that are being adopted in the United States are classified as special needs. But it's really encouraging to see the countries start to develop this adoption culture
Yes.
and be able to grow their numbers of adoptions. And we're actually helping a few countries actually help get their systems working more efficiently and quicker to get these kids into families.
Talk about the child that's either abandoned or neglected or given up on in a community, and the pros and cons of that boy or girl being in that community in an orphanage growing up. And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this sort of a, if we get a high school equivalency for that person in that culture, they have an opportunity to do pretty well?
Yeah, and I think the trend right now is try to get countries not so dependent on residential,
Okay.
um, and and so it's called deinstitutionalization movement. And there's always going to be a need for residential care, because the systems in most countries are not well developed enough, where they have foster care and other alternatives for kids, and their court systems are not very efficient to do reunification, and so kids get stuck. And so a lot of the effort right now is to try to make those systems work more efficiently, so that kids, when they come into the system, that they can move into family settings quicker. And and so the idea is to keep a child in the community in which they live. And I'll give you an example of this. Like in a country we work in, the system is broken, and they're doing things to make it better. But we had a residential program where the director of that home had a boy in his care, and he had no history on him whatsoever. He didn't know where he came from, where his family was from. So finally found the jurisdiction that he was sent there from, and he went to the judge, and he says, "Hey, can you give me some records on this kid?" And so the judge says, "Well, I don't really have time, but here's a room over here. Go over into this room, and there's a bunch of files there. See if you can find it." So he goes into this room, and he massive boxes of files. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of boxes, and thousands of files that are in there. So he just prays. He says, "Lord, help me find this file." So he goes to one box in a corner and he pulls the box out. The first one he pulls out is that kid's.
No.
Amazing. I mean, the Lord, obviously. So he pulls it out. He finds out where the kid was from. So they take a visit. It's a remote village. Goes to this remote village. The whole village thought he was dead. In fact, they had already had a funeral for him and had a
Whoa.
gravestone for him. And and so when they found out he was alive, there were relatives there that were more than willing to take him into care.
Interesting. Yeah. How
And
old
so
was
they
he?
were able to, he was about, I think around 10 years old. I'm not for
Wow.
sure about that,
Wow.
but that is an example of how the system doesn't work for kids. And so, our work, we do direct work with kids, obviously with schools and everything else we do, but part of our work is to help these systems work more efficiently because when they don't work well, kids get stuck in the system and the outcomes are not good for those kids. And so, you have to look at it more comprehensively about how can we make this system work better for kids. I'm on the board of an organization called Both Ends Believing, and they worked with Tyler Technologies here in Dallas. It's one of the largest database technology companies in the country that provides the software for all the court system in the U.S., a big portion of it. And they helped design a software that actually manages child welfare programs. And so we go into countries who offer the software for free, but the whole goal of that is to provide the information that the system needs to move kids through the system faster
Mm.
so they can get a forever family and they can go not have to grow up in an orphanage and to provide hope for those kids. And so Orphan Outreach works very closely in those efforts in the countries that we're working in to make the system work better for kids.
When you take teams over, and of course, my wife Cindy has been very involved with going to these different sites and visiting, and she comes back all jazzed up and excited and overwhelmed and all points in between. But
Hmm.
it's so interesting because typically ministries that they want you to do something, they want you to give money, of course, they want you to go. But Orphan Outreach, your MO is like just go and see. Just
Hmm.
go and visit the orphanage. You might help play with some kids. You might do some music. You had a very interesting project in Guatemala, I believe, where a young lady did like a playground area with some turf and different things for kids. They didn't really have like a lawn or a park to play in. She did it. And you've got some very interesting ways of having people see something and then say, hey, I could do something that
Hmm.
would be a blessing to these kids primarily, and I guess you call them house parents, the folks
Hmm.
that shepherd these kids.
Yeah, Acts 1:8, go to the reaches of the world, and seeing is you can help without seeing. There's no question about that. I mean, you can hear the stories and see the videos and understand what the problem is and donate. But one person described to me, it's like looking at a black and white versus photograph versus the color photograph. When you go, you understand more of the pain of these kids and the suffering that they're going through. We just had a kid. I heard a story yesterday where we had a group in Guatemala, and there was a kid that they were washing the kid's feet. They had brought shoes and they were washing their feet to try to demonstrate the love of Christ and that humility. And one of the kids kind of melted down and was upset. Said, I took a bath this morning. My mom will be upset if you wash my feet because it'll mean that she didn't wash my feet well enough.
Ooh.
And so he went off into the corner and he was crying. He was upset. And then he finally, after they talked to him, he says, "Well, the reason I'm upset is that I don't have a soccer ball. I've got 2 coins here in my pocket, and I need 3 coins to get a ball, and all I want is a ball." And my dad said, you got to figure it out. You got 2 coins, find out, how to do it. And I can't find the other, I can't get the other coin. I can't get the other coin. And so the Tiffany at her staff was saying, but God can provide that. We need to pray. We just need to pray about it. Well, it just so happened his sponsor was there, who was sponsoring him, and that later that day, he had brought a soccer ball for this kid, and both him and his mom were like, God can provide. He provided this gift for me, and it's that simple act that is a lesson that child will never forget
Mm.
about how God can provide. And you can't do those things unless you go and you interact. Um, there's been kind of a movement in Christian circles the last few years about not anti-mission trip, about not visiting orphanages, and that it does more harm than good and things of that nature. And there are bad ways to do mission trips, no question about it. We need to make sure that we're doing things in an appropriate way. But my feeling is that one of the mandates of the New Testament is that we're to visit the orphan, the widow, the prisoner. We need to go and touch them and have an impact on their lives. And it doesn't really matter if, okay, if it's a perfect best practice in the place that you're ministering to. That's not the requirement in the Bible. It says go and visit. I worked in the prison system. I hadn't been to a prison that I would say is a good place, but we're to go and have an impact. And I will tell you that I've seen kids' lives changed, and I've seen the trip participants' lives changed
Yeah.
in their perspective of what ministry is all about and what an impact they can have on these children and families that we work with.
One of Cindy's highlights was when she visited an orphanage of HIV kids. And she has said many times that was her favorite orphanage
Yeah.
because there's nothing there.
Hmm.
The props are gone. These kids, for the most part, are, they may be okay, but most of them are very ill. Their parents are out of the
Hmm.
picture. And she said, but the kids, the singing, the love they have when someone comes in the door and just spends a little time with them. And she said it's overwhelming. She says you feel like, you're going there to help, but it's the other way around. They're ministering to
Absolutely.
you because they got nothing. And
Right.
the joy they have and their childlike faith and singing hymns, she said it's just mind blowing to see that, community of kids that I guess most of them have a death sentence very early in life.
All those kids are HIV positive, and several of those kids have passed away. They're all facing potential death. And that the neat things, the people that visit there regularly, they have a wall with pictures of all those people on the wall, and they pray for them regularly. They pray for the trip participants. When COVID hit and we couldn't go and bring our teams there, the kids all got together and said, "We need to raise money so we can go visit these people." And these are kids who are very ill.
Yeah,
But that connection makes all the difference. I mean,
yeah,
ministry is about relationship
yeah.
and digging into relationship and having an impact. And don't want to tell too many stories, but I had this one girl that in Russia that Anita and I got very close to at a young age when she was still in the orphanage. And then she graduated, and her name was Tamara, and she wanted to get into acting. And she was very flamboyant and fun to be around. And so every time I was in Moscow, I would visit her. Well, she after she got out of the orphanage, just check on her, see how she was doing. And so one time she called the translator and said, "Hey, I want Mike to meet me on this spot." And so I was like, "Oh, that's kind of unusual." It was a park somewhere. And so we went to the park, and she was actually in a commercial. And so they loaded up all the buses. They had a bunch of kids that were in this commercial, and she was also in the commercial. And they had been driving off every day to do their shoot, but they all met there. So I met with Tamara. We were talking, catching up, and everything. Well, then it was time for them to leave. And so she leaves and she gets on the bus and she runs to the back of the bus. Remember, she's probably, at this time, she's probably about 20 years old. Runs to the back of the bus. And so the bus is leaving and she's waving and I'm waving back to her. And as they go off, and I turned around and the translator's just tears running down her eyes. I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Well, you know why she wanted you here." I said, "No." And she said, "All the kids have their parents and say goodbye to them. She wanted you here so she had someone to wave goodbye to." That is that is ministry, you know. And it's hard to do that from afar. To have that
Yeah.
kind of impact on a child's life, and we can do that. It isn't rocket science. It's just being available, being willing, and investing in a child's life.
You began the story in Russia, and I had asked you years ago about, impact of visiting and do they remember you? And I thought you were going to tell the story about the young girl. I think you have her picture.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. So share that account because that's another one
yeah.
that's kind of rips my heart out.
And these are special kids, but I was in Russia when, and I don't know how many listeners remember the apartment buildings that were bombed in Moscow and in St. Petersburg in the late 90s. And I was there when that happened. In fact, I was actually on site we were providing some humanitarian aid after it happened. But my plans got disrupted. So I went with another group to the region in Russia called Vladimir, and we visited an orphanage called Vestora. And so I didn't have really anything to do. Usually I got things to do and I was just tagging along with this group. So I hung out with kids all day long and which was wonderful. And so I met this girl, Natasha. And Natasha I mean, she was on me like glue. I mean, she was everywhere I went, she was right behind me. I was tripping over her. And we just connected but because we didn't work in that orphanage, I wasn't, going back to it as often, but I went back a few times to check on her and her sister. And but then I lost contact because we hadn't been going to that region. Well, then flip forward I think it was about 10 or 11 years later. I'm in Russia, and I was in the region, and I asked the translator. I said, "Hey, do you remember Natasha? Votakovia?" And she was like, "Oh yeah, I remember her." And I said, "Do you know where she is now?" I was just trying to catch up. She says, "Oh, she's in an apartment in Vladimir. That's her and her sister live in it." I said, "Well, we driving by there?" And she said, "Oh yeah, we're going right by it." And so I thought, oh, well, that'd be great. Let's stop by and say hello. I'd love to see her, And so we did. We veered off and got to the apartment. And then I got worried that she's not going to remember me. I mean, it was like 11 years ago, and I only spent a few times with her. And so we're going to the door, and I'm thinking, she's going to think, who is this old guy sitting there knocking on my door? And so we knock, and immediately when she sees me, we embrace each other, and obviously teary eyes, and just such a wonderful reunion. And she's a beautiful girl. She's 20 years old now, and she's telling me about her life. So she wants to show me her apartment. And so I said, "Oh, I'd love to see it." So we go back into her bedroom area, and she has a little shelf in there. And on the shelf is a picture of me and her when she was 11 years old. She kept that photograph for 11 years. And you say, "Well, what kind of impact can I make on a trip?" You know, that's how you can be. I mean, the connection that God can create, and then I got reintroduced in her life, and we helped her with some things with transition, and we're connected now. But That's the impact we can have. And it didn't take much. It took a few days of us just hanging out together, getting to know each other, and me showing her that she's uniquely loved.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of these kids, it's kind of interesting, the dynamic of kids that are in orphanages and the child welfare system, they blame themselves.
Mm.
They don't blame their parents. I'm not good enough.
Wow.
I'm not lovable. I'm not unique. That's why I'm in the child welfare system. It's my
Wow.
fault. When you go in and show them they're uniquely loved, that's when you have real impact. I mean, and you show you're the I think we're the living demonstration of God's love in their life. That physical, tangible example of how much God cares for them.
Cindy and I were at your recent annual gala event, and one of the families that told some stories was a grocery owner in a part of Texas,
Mm-hmm.
and how he, a lot of these you check out and you can round up, so much to pay for, something in the area or some nonprofit, whatever. And he did this for Orphan Outreach and others. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, what a creative way. And that's the other thing that Cindy's always blown away at the way people think about how can we do this. It's not overbearing. It's not overtaxing. Sure, it costs money. It's an investment, but there are creative ways to get people involved. And of course, Tiffany is a wizard, and she can organize a handful of 4, 5, 6 women and have a trip of a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to folks who maybe, okay, you tug my heartstrings a little bit. Yes, I know it's biblical. I really don't want to go overseas, Mike. It's hard to travel, but talk to them about what happens when you get 4 or 5 or 6 of your friends together and you say, let's go, instead of a vacation to 30A or, Outer Banks,
Mm-hmm.
let's go to Guatemala. Let's go to India. Let's go to visit 2 or 3 orphanages. What's in store for them?
I will tell you that it's understandable people get nervous about going into some of these countries, and also like, what can I do? I'm an accountant, or whatever profession you are, and I don't even know how to relate to these kids. What am I going to do? And when they go on the trip, we make it so easy for them to engage, and we structure it in a way that it's very easy to get connected, and it transforms them. I mean, it's just it's hard to describe. We just hired a new development person who went on her first trip just last week, and she came back and she was talking to our group. She's changed. I mean, it's just like she's like, oh, this was just amazing. It was, from a spiritual point of view, but also just the opportunity to meet these kids. And she has a goal to sponsor a kid in every country, to get connected in that way. So I would say that, if you have the ability to go, it's such a it really does change your perspective on things. And we don't have anybody that comes back and say, I wish I didn't go.
That's pretty
Everybody.
good. My Israel trips, there's always 1 or 2. Didn't like the
Well,
food.
it's not like it's nothing ever doesn't go
Yeah,
wrong.
right.
It's international travel, but
Oh, it's
you
so
know,
luxurious international travel.
right.
It's like those
But
old
it's
Pan Am commercials, right? Yeah.
right, yeah, exactly. But it's and I've had the privilege to make my passion my life's work, which is an
Yeah.
amazing blessing. And I've been able to be in lots of countries and lots of different places where kids are, and it never gets old for me. Every trip, I God teaches me something, and I get renewed and refreshed. That this is God's work. He's doing this, and we get the privilege to participate in it. That's the amazing thing. Is I'm 73 now, an old guy, but every day I still get amazed at what God is doing, and challenged to work harder. So.
All right. Give me 2 or 3 specifics. There's someone listening and they're going, okay, I'd be interested in maybe finding out more. What do they need to do?
Uh, well, orphanoutreach.org is our website. And so list all the mission trips that we have. You can call us. The numbers right there, and get connected. And so, uh, we've got a great mission teams that will help walk you through the whole process. A lot of it is very automated, but we make sure that everybody has a easy access if they want to go. We try to make it as easy as possible, and so just get connected that way. We have a number of events as well. We have our CHD Children's Hope dinner every year. We just had it, and
Yeah.
full disclosure, Cindy Easley is on our board, and is an amazing board member, and a privilege for me to have her on this journey with me, and of course you, Michael, supporting Cindy in that effort. And so that's the best way to get connected, is just contact us that way, and then we'll plug you in wherever you want to be plugged in.
And for our audience and folks that either watch on YouTube or listen on different podcast streaming platforms, this is a great thing to get your toe in the water without fear or anxiety, because Orphan Outreach does an extraordinary job of running all the traps for you, helping you get ready for an overseas trip. Many people have never been out of the country, and Cindy loves it. She's taken groups of friends, and she often tells me, all you have to do is get 3 or 4 of your friends and say, let's do this together. And
Yeah,
it's not,
absolutely.
yeah, it's not only a ministry, it's enjoyable. They have a great time together. They pray together. They spend time laughing on the trip back and forth. Luggage gets lost, all the things that happen in travel. But it's the overarching picture of, I get to minister with other people that are like-minded, that want to help. And it is a bug. When you do
Hmm.
this, you do get the bug, and it's like, okay,
Right.
what else can we do? And it's just been a privilege to know you and Anita all these years and watch how God uses you. It's fun from the cheap seats, and I'm thrilled Cindy gets to do it firsthand, because she loves, whenever it's a board meeting or a call or going to Dallas or going on a trip, she just loves being involved, and it's a privilege to co-labor with you. As always, in our show notes, there's information. If you didn't hear Mike talk about orphanoutreach.org, just search. You'll find all the information. Give them a call. Their staff are incredible, and I can't encourage you enough. If God's stirring something in your heart, maybe you're at a chapter where, I haven't done anything new or different ministry-wise. Give it a try. See what God might do in your heart, and opportunities He may open for you to minister to those who are really in need. And you might find it's a lot easier than you thought, and God will bless you in your efforts. So, Mike, thanks again for your friendship, your faithfulness
Oh,
all
thank
these years,
you.
buddy. Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate the time and the long friendship. It's a
Amen.
blessing to be in Anita, for sure.